to get through chapter 3 and 4 and end the book of Ruth together. So, but I have to say, every time I return to study the book of Ruth like this, which I do usually every few years, I'm just struck again about 4 little chapters, what's actually packed into the narrative. I mean, do we have any English teachers in the when our kids are learning how to write, and they get, a word, you have to write a paper of how many words, right? And then the number of words, like, how do you fill up, how do you, edit down. This is so really very terse. The language is so terse. There are really so few words, and yet how much impact and how much, choice of a few words can resonate to so many other stories. So, we are going to start with chapter 3, and we are on page 1745. Oh, I'm in the brown. Okay. Chapter 3 of Ruth. If you have a different book than somebody else will help you with the pages. Okay. So, just last week, you just remember, Ruth went out to glean, and lo and behold, just happened to find herself in the fields of Boaz, where we, the reader, are told that he is her kinsman, right? She doesn't know this yet. This hasn't been revealed yet who he is. He now knows who she is. We find out when he says to her that he's heard about her loyalty to Naomi, so he knows who she is. She doesn't know who he is. Which of course, again, the question of what, this woman who's a foreigner, what would she actually know, right? She's walking into this strange situation in a country that she's never lived in. She doesn't know everything that's going on, and I think that we know something that she doesn't know sort of emphasizes that idea that, there are lots of things she doesn't know. Because we just finished reading Lech Lecha, the story of Abraham leaving his land, there was a presentation actually at the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and talking about the idea of what does it mean to leave your land? What is it that you leave behind when you leave your land? You leave your language, you leave your family, you leave, knowing which is the best baker, all the things that you know, right, that you take for granted about what you know when you move to a new place and you have to learn all over again. And there are the things that you can learn simply by asking, who do you think is the best? It's kind of dramatic. I don't know how many people have ever moved to a different country. I other than living in Israel, have you ever done that? Where where you all of a sudden live in a place where you might actually understand the words that are being said, but you don't understand the nuance. And I'll tell you, I'm sure people have had this experience, but I lost my mother a year and a half ago, and one of the things that I said when she was in the hospital for the last few weeks of her life is, I'm in medical land. And I think I speak the language, because the doctor and the nurses are speaking to me in English, but I don't really understand what they're saying. Like, we're not really communicating, because even though they're speaking to me in English, there's a whole wealth of things. Sort of a dramatic example of this, but I finally said to the doctor, just tell me the truth. Is my mother dying? And he said to me, I would categorize it as failure to thrive. So I understand the words failure to thrive. Are you answering my question, right? So that was sort of, and I think we've all been through this, right? Medical speak is not, we understand English, they're speaking to us in English, but we're not always communicating. The truth is this actually happens even in marriages, right? This happens in marriages, the certain assumptions that people make, because this is how my family did it. And so when you express something, there's an assumption the other person's going to understand, but they have a whole other set of expectations because of the way their family did it. But to be a foreigner in a country, she doesn't know any of the customs, she doesn't know anything. But what's fun about the story is that we know, right? The narrator tells us. So we're like an insider, right? It brings us, we're an insider, right? We're an insider to the story, where Ruth is still seen as an outsider, and that emphasizes the drama of it. So, now Now Naomi knows a little bit more, right? Because Naomi is a native. She's been gone for a long time, but she's a native and she knows how things work. So Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, daughter, right? So, right, back to daughter, we're back to my daughter actually, in Hebrew, my daughter. So we're back to that. You know, Naomi kind of fades in and out depending on, well, who she's talking to maybe, right? But my daughter, and what does she want to do for her? I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Right? Now that's an interesting phrase in Hebrew. Hebrew's more, where it will be good for you. Right? Where it will be good for you. Happy, I don't know that happy is a biblical concept at all, you know. Happy, I mean, what's happy? Happy means, you know, you have enough food on the table, right? You're cared for, I mean, happy. But a place, I want to find a place that will be good for you, right? A place that will be good for you, a place where you will be cared for. Now, interesting to sort of the juxtaposition of what does Naomi say to Ruth when they're leaving Moab? I can't provide you with a home, right? I have no sons. I can't provide you with a son. So go back to your mother's house where you will still have the possibility of finding a husband. So those are the words that she says to her when they're leaving Moab. Now that they're back in Bethlehem, she is committed. It's a beautiful sort of juxtaposition, right? Okay, so she's not going to have any more sons, but Naomi does know something that Ruth doesn't know, which is the whole idea of a kinsman, which she doesn't even think about in Moab. Like, okay, if you come back to me to Israel, I won't have any more sons, but there might be another male relative that I could find for you. She can't even think about that when she's in Moab. But now that she's home and a little time has passed and Ruth has gone out and gleaned and there's a little bit of food on the table, all of a sudden Naomi wants to make sure that Ruth is cared for. Right? And it's not just don't worry, Ruth, it'll be you and me together and you'll continue to glean and we'll be fine. She wants to make sure that Ruth is settled in a place that's good for her. So she's now taking this is what was supposed to happen in Ruth's mother's house. Right? So now Naomi is stepping up to be Ruth's mother, because it's the mother, according to the story, when she's told to go back to the mother's house to find a husband. That's somehow the mother's responsibility. And now Naomi, who calls her my daughter, is stepping up to take the responsibilities of a mother, to make sure that she finds a place that's good for her. Now, again, we knew this already, so we've just been waiting for the reveal. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. Right, so we knew it, now Naomi knows it, now Ruth knows it too. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. Now, the advice that we're about to get, I don't know that very many mothers or mother-in-laws have ever given to their daughters. Now, there's a couple things that you need to understand sort of about Jewish law, especially as it develops over rabbinic times, but probably in ancient times as well, is that men and women need to stay apart from one another. Single, available men and women need to stay apart from one another. Yes, in the fields, they come into close contact with one another. It could be dangerous. It could lead, even if it's not dangerous, it could lead to, mixed dancing. It could lead to things that people aren't, young women are not supposed to be doing with young men.
Is it different from a single woman and a widow? Now, she was married. Does that make a difference in how a woman is protected?
Well, I'll tell you what makes a difference is her virginity doesn't need to be protected.
That's
right? Her virginity, which would be her value, her worth, is no longer a concern. So that's a good point. It's very possible that Naomi is willing to send her out to do this, because even if things don't work out well, she's not going to, you don't have to worry about that. So virgins were much more protected. The truth is, in ancient times, and really in not so ancient times, a woman's virginity was of value to her father, right? He got more dowry for her if she, more money for her. She was worth more if she was a virgin, and if she wasn't, she was, worth almost nothing, unless she could fake it. But you had, that was a big issue. And if a man took that from her, actually the truth is if a man took that from her, if an Israelite had sex with an Israelite woman, he actually officially married her and had to then be responsible for her, right? And once he you break it, you buy it, So once he, right, that's what he owed her. He owed her and the family that he would then have to care for her. So, or financially care for her. So, nonetheless, you really aren't usually, I don't think we have any other story, and we don't have any other story in the entire Bible where a woman is told to bathe herself and to go out and look for a man at night when he's going to be alone. Right? This is just, now by the time of Rabbinic Judaism, the law becomes so codified that there's this assumption in Rabbinic law that a man and a woman should never be alone together. And if you look at how, especially in the more rigid sects of Orthodoxy, the separation of the sexes. Because the assumption was, if they could, they would. Right? If there was a chance of two people being alone together, they would grab it and have sexual intercourse. So if there was a situation where a man and a woman spent amount of time together alone, you had to assume from a legal point of view that they had actually had sexual relations. So the best thing to do was to keep people separate. Nonetheless, Naomi is, and I think your point is well taken, that she's a widow, so it's not, it's not, the things can't go that badly, but still, if Ruth is, the question is how Naomi thinks that Ruth should best present herself to Boaz, right? She could present herself in many, many ways. This is clearly presenting herself in a sexual way, and Naomi thinks that this is what's going to be the best approach, right, for him. So, at night, right, that's the key. Like my mother used to say to me, nothing good ever happens at night. Which is why I had some, random curfew, and it's like, is there going to be a difference between home at midnight and at 1? Really? What's the difference? Nothing good. Nothing good, the lady was out, nothing good can come. So it's nighttime, it's dark, obviously, more things are going to happen in the dark. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not, which is just, it is really an incredible, the Bible is not a particularly, we read a few racy stories, but it's not particularly racy in its approach. This is about as racy as it gets, right? She's showing up at night all, yes, exactly. Clean. I don't think, first of all, let's just say bathing was not like how we think of bathing today, right? So this is a big deal to bathe. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking.
Good idea.
Right. My grandmother, always, that was the advice, right? Don't bother Grandpa until he's come home and he's had something to eat. So I do want to say that as a working mother, my entire time I was raising children, nobody ever said, let mom come in and have something to tell your father. I just saying, want to mention that, because they probably would have gotten a better answer if they had let me alone for a few minutes. But that was sort of standard advice, I think, that mothers gave to daughters, right?
But the drinking reminds me of Lot and his daughters. They got him drunk, so he wouldn't know. So maybe to take the onus off of Boaz, let him get drunk a little. He won't know what he's doing.
Oh, that's good. That's a good one. So, you're not really tricking him, but you're not really not tricking him, right? If he's had a little bit to drink, he may be, and loses some of his inhibitions, he might be more willing to go along with this than he would if it was the light of day and he hadn't had a drink.
That's what happens with Noah and with Lot, and I don't know where else it happens, but when they get drunk.
That's right. And Lot, of course, and the offspring of Lot. And Esther's king too.
So there's a lot of.
So I'm wondering if there's any good examples of drinking that in the Bible that don't lead to sex. which is again something my mother probably would have also warned me about too. So I think that's a really good point. And also when you bring up Lot and the drinking, we also have to remember that the offspring from that daughter is the ancestor of the Moabites, right? So there's already that connection too. But Boaz, as we're going to see, is such an upstanding man. You know, he's certainly not like Lot or these other characters, because he does, you know, he's going to do what's right by her. And this is actually not a forbidden relationship. Right? She's single. He's the redeeming kinsman. So there's nothing, wrong with the relationship, but he might need a little help. And he's old. Right? He's old.
He's avoided this relationship all his life.
There you go.
A little pushing.
There you go. So we don't really know. I mean, we're never told if he has another wife or if he's single. Like, we don't know if he has another wife. He's sleeping on the threshing floor this night. He's not going home anywhere. So when he lies down, like if there's any doubt, right? If there's any doubt that Naomi is coaching Ruth on how to seduce Boaz. Because otherwise, we can talk standing up. There's, get a nice conversation, but we wait till he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. Okay, so we don't, yes?
I heard on public radio just recently, they had a book and they were talking about references in the Bible. And there's feet is a euphemism for
Yes.
For sexual,
genitals.
right. That's why I said feet, right? You're uncovering, I mean, look, in ancient times, showing an elbow was risque, right? So uncovering anything was already, there's a man sleeping on the floor and you're even like touching his blanket, that is, that's pretty risque. But it is very possible that scholars say that feet is a euphemism for his genitals, in which case, this is pretty bold stuff. Also, if he is uncovered, he is somewhat vulnerable in that moment too, right? Like he could jump up and run out maybe, but it's gone so far that again, like it's going to be hard to undo it once it's gone this far. But the idea of her going in at night quietly, not letting him know that he's there, waiting, she's clean, she's anointed, she's dressed nicely, wait until he lays down, laying down next to him and pulling back the covers. So, this is a plan. I mean, this is a plan, right?
How can you resist?
How could he resist? And we know that she's young, and that she's younger than him, and that she's good. We know so many things about her that obviously, that he knows too.
And she's a good worker.
She's a good worker. He knows how good she's been to Naomi. Like, he knows all the reasons. So really, what kind of, objections could he possibly have at this point? He will tell you what you are to do, right? So he will tell you, right? So we're going to we'll keep that in mind, because that comes back later, this idea. But he'll tell you, right? Like, what he wants from you at that moment. She just needs to get him to consummate, right? Like, that's what she needs to get him to do. Then it's like a done deal, right? Once he consummates, he's responsible, and she can be in a place where she's going to be taken care of. So she replied, "I will do everything you tell me." Right? Naomi says, "Do what he tells you," and she says, "I will do what you tell me." Right? Not that she won't do also what Boaz tells her, but that she, she could have said a lot of things. This is, again, Ruth's great loyalty to Naomi, that she doesn't, do you think there could be a better plan? Like, couldn't we just, send a note? Call for a meeting, have him come over, sit with them, discuss the possibilities. Like, what kind of a plan is this? But she does what she has 100% trust in Naomi's plan and what Naomi tells her to do. So, she goes down to the threshing floor, just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. So we're not going to, revisit the bathing and the anointing and the dressing, but saying that again emphasizes what? she's going to follow the instructions, right? Naomi told her to do it, she's going to do it, exactly as Naomi told her to do it. And again, when the Bible ever repeats words, or repeats phrases, that it's emphasizing this emphasis that she's really, really following Naomi's instructions. Now, remember, part of what's risky about this is what's risky about this is he can throw her out, right?
She can have it so as a fail-safe measure by saying, I'm just doing what my mother-in-law told me to do.
Right. Yes, but he could humiliate her publicly really badly, right? If he rejects her, grabs her by the scruff of the neck, takes her outside where there are, workers probably around and saying, look at this, Moabite woman that I found, crawling into my tent.
But he is a compassionate
He
person.
is.
We saw that before, and he would have pity on her, and I don't think his nature wouldn't do that.
Naomi feels that it's worth the risk, and Ruth feels, because she wants to follow Naomi's instructions, and maybe because she's also met him and he's already been kind to her, that it is a risk worth taking, but it's still a risk, right? It's still a risk that he could reject her. And if he rejects her sexual advances in a public way, good luck finding any other man that's ever gonna, want you in that society, or want to marry you in that society.
Well, I was listening to the story, and it's amazing because they want us to accept the fact she is a mother and a family. They want us to accept the fact that the bond, here is something so electric between her and Naomi, obviously, that she is willing to do whatever. And Naomi wants to do it for her. They've set up this connection. Like, what about her mother? What about her family?
Like, once she's left her family, they're just
I know,
gone,
it's like-
right? They're gone. But she and Naomi have this in fact, first, we see this great loyalty when Ruth follows Naomi.
Right.
And says, where you dwell, I will dwell, this beautiful pledge. And now we really see what that means, right? What that means is, we need food on the table, I'll go out and make sure we have food on the table. I get offered extra food, I take some of it home and save it so that I make sure that you have extra food. You tell me to go out in the middle of the night to a man's tent, I'm gonna go.
I was just thinking that all the things that she's told to do may be foreign to her. In other words, in her country, uncovering a man's street might be nothing. And all the other side instructions are given to someone who is indeed in a foreign country. So she, as when they tell you that the makolet over there is better than the makolet over there because they know and you don't, you're going to go where they tell you to go. And I think that's part of it also.
So she needs to follow
She
instructions,
needs to,
because she
because
doesn't
she doesn't
know how to get together with this redeeming kinsman.
So was this also when you slept with somebody that you were technically married to them?
That's really by rabbinic times, so I'm not sure that it wouldn't be anachronistic to say that in biblical times. I mean, the rabbis really developed that as a legal category. So I don't know that I would go as far as saying that once he consummates that they're actually married. I suppose you could consummate and say, okay, that was nice, now goodbye.
And if he was a single man, why isn't somebody else in the tent? I mean, that's
Right.
the most aggressive thing I think that a woman could do.
Right. She's always on, I just said tent, he's on the threshing floor, right? So he's not at home, he's still out on the threshing floor in the fields, finishing the harvest, right? So we were told at the end of chapter 2 that the barley harvest is over, but there's still work to be done, right? You have all this produce that you've harvested, so he's still threshing, so he's still sleeping out where the barley is. But yeah, there's nothing more aggressive, and that's why I don't think it's, we have lots of daughters, that's pretty, that's very aggressive. But this is the most aggressive thing that a woman could do to initiate sexual relations with a man. Like, this is just sort of, we've got Tamar and Judah, we'll talk about that in a little bit, because Tamar also always does it. We have really 3 stories of women being the, I don't want to say sexual aggressor sounds negative, but being the people that initiate sexual relations for the good of something else. So Lot's daughters think the world is ended and they have to have sexual relations with their father in order to continue the human race, and they're not condemned for that. Tamar and Judah we'll talk about in a few moments, what happens there, and then this story. So every time that women do it, it's like for the good of the future of the people, you know, of humanity, of the people, Israel, but it's not what would be considered common, appropriate, desirable. But it also reminds me a little bit of Esther, right, who gets all, right, when she's preparing before she goes into Ahasuerus, and she says to the servant, you tell me what I should use, right? He brings her oils and balms and all these things, and she says, you know, you tell me. And she uses what he suggests, because first of all, who doesn't like that? So now she's in good with this chief eunuch. But also, he actually may have a little more information about what the king actually likes. So why not, you know, use that information to your benefit? So again, this idea that, you know, women use their sexual powers, you know, for the good of humanity. Otherwise, you know, you need to back off.
So Naomi is off the stage now, but you can't help wondering what's going through her mind as she sends this young woman off to the threshing floor. What, is she sleeping? Is she
Right.
walking around? Is she, what's going on? You know, she's off the stage.
Right, she's
But
off stage.
she's still in my mind.
Right, that's nice. You know, the other thing too is it's not that safe for women to be out wandering around out to the threshing floor at night by herself. Like, it's kind of dangerous. She could get, you know, we already know that he tells, you know, she needs to stay away from the young men. There are other men that she could encounter first. So it's a little risky, it's a little scary. It's not like, you know, she just shows up at his doorstep. She's got to maneuver to get there at night by herself. That's already, you know, also a gutsy thing. So I think the one thing we can say about Ruth is she's a pretty gutsy person. Like every time she has the choice to make, she takes the choice, you know, that's the least likely, but the most, you know, brave and breaking out of any mold of the world that she had been raised in. Boaz ate and drank and in a cheerful mood. It's good, he's in a good mood, right? It's good. He'll eat, he'll drink, he's in a good mood. Went to lie down beside the grain pile. Which I don't know if that means he's like behind the grain pile, so at least they have some privacy. Because again, you know, this is another thing too, is that sexual relations, and you know, and really up until really modern times, is something that's so private, so private. So you wouldn't consider having, you know, sex out where somebody might happen to, you know, just see you. She went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. Right? So she, you know, this is bold stuff. In the middle of the night, so he was sleeping, I guess he didn't wake up right away. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. You know, what a surprise, you know, what a surprise. Who are you, he asked, right? So it's dark, he may be a little, you know, and you're just woken up suddenly and you're surprised, and Jacob and Leah, oh nice, who are you? You know, get what the woman that he, you know, here she is, surprise, surprise. And she replied, I am your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman. Now, don't like the translation, right? Spread your wings over me, right? Spread your wings over me. Now, we've heard the phrase, he uses this, right? When he blesses her, when he first realizes who she is, he blesses her and asks that God's wings be spread over her. Right? Remember I talked about that there's a beautiful Malay Rachamim prayer where we ask for God to spread his wings over our beloved departed, and she's using his words back to him. You spread your wings over me. Right, you protect me. But anyway, you know, it's like very nice to have God's protection, but guess what I really need? I need a man down here on earth to really protect me. But the beauty of her turning his words back on me, right? To spread your wing over me. For you are a redeeming kinsman, right? She might have wanted to lead with that, right? But again, the story likes to build, right? I am Ruth, spread your wings over me, you are a redeeming kinsman. Like, she might want to just say, like, you're a redeeming kinsman, and by the way, you know, like, so the story sort of builds. But you are the appropriate person for me. Like, don't think that what I'm doing is inappropriate, because you're my next in line to marry me. He exclaimed, be blessed of the Lord, daughter. So BT, my daughter, which is my daughter, right? My daughter. So who does he sound like? When he calls her my daughter, he sounds like Naomi. He sounds, again, older, protective. There are lots of love names that lovers call one another. I doubt my daughter is on the top 100 list of love names, right? My daughter, that's kind of creepy. So this isn't a romance, right, in the technical way that we would think of a romance, right? Again, we want to be swept away, that she's so beautiful, and he falls in love with her. But he really telegraphs this message to her that he may take care of her, and obviously we know he's going to have sex with her because they end up having a baby, or going to give anything away. But he is still very patriarchal to her, right? She is his daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, and you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. So what do you think he means by that? Right, there are lots of people to choose from.
About how old are they now?
I don't think we really know how old they are now. I think Boaz is Naomi's generation, and Ruth is, maybe 15 to 20 years younger. So hard to know. Maybe Ruth is 25 and he's 45.
I would think too that he recognizes the fact that he might have some loyalty to Ruth and Naomi, because knowing the rule that you're supposed to, if your husband died, you're supposed to be married by somebody else in the family.
Right. So that's her loyalty, right? Her loyalty is, so we talked about the concept of Levirate marriage, right? That in the Torah we're told that if a man dies childless, his brother or his nearest kinsman needs to marry this woman. She has a baby with him. That baby boy becomes the heir of the dead husband. So it's considered, we normally consider it a great act of loyalty of the brother or the kinsman to take responsibility for this woman, because there's very little financial, if any, financial benefit. And a lot of marriages were about financial benefit, right? They were alliances. You bring this, I bring that. It's to strengthen the family. So usually you think of it as the loyalty of the redeeming kinsman, because he may have all other sons, but they don't inherit, right? With this money that she brings in. Who inherits is this child. So he has to care for her, he has to care for the child, but he doesn't get, the whatever it is that she would bring into the marriage. Or maybe she brings nothing into the marriage, and he's just responsible now for caring for her and her offspring. But the Bible tells us that she's being loyal. Because at this point, why is she still interested in a Levirate marriage? Like, she did her duty. She's a Moabite. She's not an Israelite. She brought Naomi home. There are all these other handsome young men. Some of them might have even money. She could marry another guy. What does she need to marry? An older man like Boaz? She could have had anybody. But she remains loyal to the Israelite traditions of Naomi and her husband.
I also can't help but thinking who they're going to parent and down the road, and why the Bible picked a character like Boaz to be, is the great-grandfather of David?
I things. We'll go, when we get to the genealogy, we'll count.
So I guess there must be some importance to how he's responding to sire the future king of Israel.
Right, that's right, that's right. And we'll talk about the genealogy when we actually get a little bit further, closer to the part where it actually talks about it. But this is, both of them, right, are the ancestors of King David, right? So this is not just a story about a lovely young Moabite girl meeting this lovely, elderly Israelite man, and the two of them live happily ever after. This is the story of the founding of a dynasty. So who are these people? Who are these people that are worthy of founding a dynasty? Now, both of them have, let's just say, interesting ancestors, right? Ruth is a Moabite. The Moabites, we're told, come from Lot in his incestuous relationship with his daughter. We are told that, in the Torah, that we don't like, nor should we trust the Moabites, and we shouldn't marry them. And Ruth stands out as the shining example of the exception to the rule, and everything we've seen about her, what a wonderful person she is, because of how loyal this person is, that being loyal to the traditions of the Jewish people trump her lineage, which is a very interesting message, right? It's a very interesting message for a religion that's tribal. We're, not so much anymore, but we tended to be pretty ethnocentric in the way we looked at. We already see in the story that she's referred to the Moabitess several times, though interestingly enough, not in this chapter, not when Naomi's talking about her, and not when Boaz is talking about her. But her loyalty to the Israelite tradition trumps her genealogy, and therefore she could be, or she is, merits being the ancestor of King David. And Boaz is a lovely, upright, kind person who also doesn't take advantage of this young foreign woman. Now, he also comes from an interesting, we'll just mention it now, though we'll see it again, but in the Torah, we have the story of Judah, who's one of Jacob's sons. And Judah's oldest son marries a woman named Tamar, and he dies and without children, and then young, and then Tamar marries the second brother, and he dies and leaves her without children, and Judah has one more son, and he's like, no way.
Bad luck.
She is bad luck. She's like a black widow. I'm not giving my next son to Tamar. Tough luck. So Tamar is kind of stuck, right? She's stuck. She doesn't, have anywhere to go. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have any children. And so she dresses up as a harlot, as a prostitute, and waits by the side of the road, and Judah doesn't recognize her, and has sex with her, and in the days before credit cards, prostitutes actually take credit cards, he leaves her his robe, his staff and his belt. He leaves her something that she, ID, right? That she can then, I guess, redeem for cash, right? He doesn't have any cash on him. This doesn't stop him from taking a little side, trip. But he leaves her these items so that guarantee that he will pay the money that he owes her, right? She holds on to them. She becomes pregnant. Women that become pregnant, unmarried, even though she's a widow, right? Not good, right? Not good, and she is going to be punished for this because this is, absolutely inappropriate behavior. And Judah sort of calls her out, and she very quietly sends him his staff and his belt or whatever it is, and she says to him, do you recognize these? By this man, I am pregnant. He realizes, of course, that they're his, and he understands that Tamar tricked him, but he understands that she's calling him to task for not taking care of his responsibilities to make sure that she had a redeeming kinsman and that she was taken care of. She gives birth to Peretz, who is, then Boaz is his descendant. So we've got every like sort of, you know, forbidden sexual relationship that women could possibly pull off in that society end up becoming the ancestors of King David. Which is a really, I mean, interesting on so many levels. Because first of all, this approval of women taking matters into their own hands, even if they have to use sex to do it, that, you know, that the Torah and the Bible gives it any kind of stamp of approval. Because you might think they'd say, well, that's going too far. You know, no matter how desperate you are, that's going too far.
But it must have happened, otherwise it wouldn't have been there. And it must have been more prevalent than you think.
Well, the other thing is, what else did women really have to use? You know, what other power did you really have in society? You know, than if you were an attractive woman and you could use your sexual power. How much else? You didn't really have anything else. But to think that this is the story of the founding of the dynasty of King David, like, why does the Bible, you know, if you think about if you were the king, right? What kind of stories would be told of your birth, right? I'm not an expert in, you know, other ancient cultures and the stories of the founding of their dynasties, but I bet that there's not a lot of like incest and, you know, and foreigners and all the kinds of people that you should, like, it's fascinating to wonder why the Bible tells us about, or what it's trying to tell us by these relationships.
I think it's interesting because right now going on in Israel is a whole controversy about recognizing conversions. And so here we have the great King David's lineage is, I mean, is considered a convert.
Yeah, it's considered the first convert.
So the other piece of this is I mean, what quality do they all exhibit? I will sacrifice myself for what I'm supposed to be doing as an Israelite and what God wants me to do, to be fruitful and multiply.
That's
So the bottom line is that is the essential thing, is to propagate and continue the line of Israel.
And these are all women who are taking on responsibility when the men don't take on responsibility. Now we're going to see Boaz, he has a really good reason why he didn't. But this is women saying, you know what, this is the way Israelite people do this, and we're gonna, I mean, not last daughters, they weren't really, I don't know if you could consider them actually Israelites, but they think that the world is gonna come to an end. So people, you have to do what you have to do.
Is it a stretch to think that it was kept in? Because this story and the story of Tamar and there's a few others that I can't think of off the top of my head, that show that even though they have broken a rule, God still is there for them. And I think that it displays that attribute of God, that forgiving nature of God.
But part of it is that the rule that they break is how one uses their sexuality, but the rule they uphold is the rule of continuing the lineage. But I still think it's interesting that, you know, you think about, like, you know, George Washington and the cherry tree, you know, which of course we all learned as kids and then found out that, of course, it wasn't actually true. That he could not tell a lie, but whoever wrote the story about him didn't have the same issues. But the mythic stories that are created around founding, let's say, fathers, and maybe sometimes founding mothers, that want to exhibit all of their wonderful qualities. And that the Bible is, in so many ways, it's like the exact opposite, right? It tells us the stories, the nitty-gritty stories. Some of them aren't nice, some of them don't make them look very good, you know, and they're all there. And so you'd think that you'd want a birth story of the dynasty. Remember, David is not just the founder of the dynasty, but the Messiah is supposed to come from the house of David, which means the Messiah is supposed to come from all of these relations. And so that think, what do these people have in common? What is it that's most important to them? Upholding law, even if it means sometimes you gotta, you know, go against some other rules. That's what's, and the other thing that's important to note is that none of the women are married. Because if they were married, then it would be adultery, and that could not be forgiven or acceptable. But you've got single women, so what they're doing may be considered not nice, might be considered, you know, bad, but it's not considered a sin in the same way that adultery, though incest it would be in that category, but that was really desperate.
wait a second, so David had Bathsheba.
Right.
They closed the whole theory.
Well, David is not, I mean, that story, it's another amazing story, because David is horrible in that story. I mean, horrible. He sees a woman bathing, he takes her, he gets her pregnant, and he has her husband killed to cover up his sin. Horrible. Only she's the mother of King Solomon. Like, you might think he would have wanted to bury that story, and maybe would have had the power to bury that story, not that it would end up in the Bible. All right. We're going to get through chapter 3. All right. So, verse 11. And now, daughter, again, in case you have no fear, I will do on your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. All right, so don't worry, you are, everybody knows how wonderful you are, how fine you are, how respected you are. However, here's our little twist, when we get to 85% on the Kindle. But while it is true I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. She's now like laying in his tent under his blankets, like, whoops. Like, this is such a great plot twist, right? Naomi didn't know, we didn't know, right? We were feeling so good because the omniscient narrator told us that Boaz is a kinsman, and we're feeling really good because we know that this is going to have a happy ending. But whoops, the narrator has tricked us because nobody knew. Boaz knew, which may answer why didn't he step up? I mean, he's such a great guy. If he was the redeeming kinsman, why didn't he do something earlier? Because he's actually not the redeeming kinsman. There's somebody else that's closer. So Naomi didn't know, Ruth didn't know, we didn't know. So now we have to worry, like, maybe they're not going to really end up together after all, right? This is what always happens, right? Every movie at some point, every romantic comedy I've ever seen, at some point, through some, like, usually misunderstanding, they have to break up. And then you have to worry about how they're going to get back together. Even though you know at the end, they're really going to get back together. But still, so this adds this whole new tension pretty far into the story. I mean, we're almost at the end of chapter 3. Whoops. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, because again, you're not going to send her out in the middle of the night. Like, that's not a particularly nice thing. And dangerous. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, if he will act as redeemer, good. Let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as a redeemer for you, I will do so myself as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. Now, how do you think you feel at this moment if you're Ruth?
Rejected.
You might feel rejected. What does she know about this other
She
guy?
doesn't know what she's going to get next.
Right, great. This nice, caring, kind person who's been watching over me isn't my redeemer. There could be some other, like, horrible guy out there who I don't even know of. And now I'm kind of into it, right? Now I know, forget it, I'm gonna go meet somebody else. Like, she is so vulnerable. She's so vulnerable at this moment. She wants to do the right thing, I'm sure, because Ruth does, that's all we ever see Ruth do is the right thing. But just when she got, it's one thing to dress up for Boaz, but now she's kind of stuck there. So she lay at his feet until dawn. Again, this is one of these, like, did they or didn't they? Right? Did they or didn't they? The text does not say that they did. But given the sexual innuendos and the fact that they're alone, there are readings. So my grandmother had to explain this to me when I was really young. I used to watch old movies with her, and I didn't understand that when they sort of walked to the bedroom and it faded out, that you were to understand that they did, which I did not know. I thought they didn't, right? Like, and she's like, oh, no, that means they did. I'm like, okay. Now movies, of course, leave no question to the imagination whatsoever. Not only did they, but every, detail of what they did. But so there's a question that we don't really know. Like, we don't really know, like, is this sort of, and she lay down, fade out, or did she just happen to lay there next to him and everybody was,
I think the hint is that he did not have intercourse with her, because he's saying, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor, so he is thinking of her reputation.
Right, because for sure, once they know, if anybody knows that she spent the night alone with him in the threshing floor, everybody that hears it is going to assume that they had sexual relations.
I mean, if you think of him as being so honorable that he's thinking of her, that he's thinking there's somebody else out there, I have to assume that
It was
he
chaste.
did
It was chaste. I just wonder about the repetition of laying at his feet a second time. But in any case, so it's, we just, inquiring minds want to know. Okay. Right, so she rose before one person could distinguish another. It's just as a little aside, in Rabbinic Judaism, when they ask about the time to pray Shachrit, they talk about being able to distinguish like night from day, and when can you distinguish night from day? And it's defined as being able to see like the colors on your telly, right? Can you see the difference between blue and white? And some people say the difference between dark blue and light blue. So dark blue and white, it's earlier, and dark blue and light blue, you need a little more light maybe to distinguish. But it's interesting that that becomes sort of this, rabbinic category. So she's going out before it gets light, right? She's sneaking out before it gets light, before anybody's going to be out and about, before anybody's going to have the chance of seeing her. Because of course, if anybody should see her leaving the threshing floor, where presumably she's been all night, again, there goes her reputation. And we know what kind of a reputation does she have? Right, all the elders know how good she is, what a good person she is, or know about her. So he wants to preserve her reputation. Let it not be known, the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, hold out the shawl you are wearing. She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. So he's like, what a great guy, right? The barley harvest is over. She's not gleaning anymore. He doesn't, where's her next meal? He sends her home with food. And you just you just really wanted to work out with him. He's such a great guy. When she got back to the town, she came to her mother-in-law who asked, how is it with you, daughter? She hasn't come home all night. So Naomi's got, a little worried that, how did it go? She told her all that the man had done for her, and she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Right? Did he say that? Not right. The text doesn't say that he said that. So why might she say that she said that?
Naomi said, I went away and I came back empty. So she's saying, you're not empty.
I mean, it's a beautiful, Boaz cares about you, right? It's not just me, it's Boaz too. Like, there are people that care about you. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, right, to add, that we're, in the midst of, and, your plan worked out, we don't know exactly how your plan's going to work out, but so far so good, because he sent 6 measures of barley home for you. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So, again, she has faith with him. It may not be him, it may be the other Redeemer. Now you did your job, you went out, now stay in. Right? There's a lot of, we said the text has a lot of things about coming and going. She clings to Naomi, and then she goes out to the field, and she goes out to the threshing floor, and now stay in the house, right? While who gets to decide the business? The men, right? Now these elders that respect her, now it's in their hands. Like, we as women, when Naomi says, basically, we've done what we could, now we have to wait. And don't worry, because Boaz is going to make sure this is not going to let this drag. Meanwhile, Boaz had gone to the gate. So he obviously gets up, while she's explaining to me, she gets up really early. It's still dark. She gets home. She explains to Naomi. So how long could this have taken, right? Like, by the time she's done this, maybe now the sun's up, he's already gone to the gate. You know, when Abraham is told to sacrifice Isaac in this week's Torah portion, it says he rose up early in the morning. So the rabbis say we learn from this, even though, you know, we learn from this that one should rush to do a mitzvah. Like at the first opportunity to do a mitzvah, you should run and do it. And that's why there's actually the tradition, like for a brit milah, that you're supposed to do it, you know, you're supposed to do it it's first thing in the morning. Now, if the mohel has a busy schedule, you may not get that slot. It's not, you just don't do it early in the morning so people can go to work after, though you may think that's why the tradition started. But you know, you try to get it, you know, the idea is that you're rushing to do this mitzvah. So here's Boaz rushing to do a mitzvah, right? It's a mitzvah to redeem this woman. He's rushing out, you know, he's already at the gate before, you know, by the time, you know, Ruth gets home to explain what happened, he's already out at the gate. And now the Redeemer who Boaz had mentioned passed by. Coincidence, right? You know, divine plan. But it's interesting, I think, to, you know, juxtapose sort of Boaz kind of rushing to the gate and this guy kind of passing by. Is that right? He called, come over and sit down here, so-and-so. So-and-so. Remember, names play an important part of the story, right? Machlon and Filio, Orpah. So what does it mean when a person for all eternity is known by the name of so-and-so?
He's not very important.
He's not important, right? This is already going to tell you, like, don't worry, right? He doesn't even get a name.
I was thinking my father, who, after my mother died, a woman grabbed him, and we're grateful forever to her. But my father was at the point where he couldn't remember her name, so he'd call her, what's her name?
What's her name?
But we had utmost respect for what's her name. But this is modern day.
That term used anywhere else in the
Ploni Almoni. So Ploni Almoni, which means so-and-so, becomes, the rabbis use it. It's used in the Talmud. Ploni Almoni is when you want to say sort of a, like, I don't know, John Doe, or whatever we say in English, when you want to talk about like an anonymous person, like so-and-so. So Ploni, when they want to give an example, like a person does such and such, they sometimes use the phrase Ploni Almoni, which has a nice little, you know, rhyming ring to it.
Well, we've also studied that many times in the Bible there's a stranger or a person that does something that doesn't get recognized.
Yes.
And in life that happens, that this is a person who does something quietly, but he moves the story in that direction.
Yes.
And I think that this guy isn't named because he is one of those anonymous do-gooder, because if he hadn't said no,
Yes, but I think that they call him Ploni Almoni. It's like, it is like calling somebody Mr. So-and-so. Like, it's emphasizing, it's not just like, because we get strangers that come, or we get angels that come, but this is like Mr. So-and-so. I mean, this literally is like saying Mr. So-and-so came by. So I think it's got sort of a derogatory feel to it, that he's, you know, he's not going to do what he's supposed to do.
Maybe prevent giving him so he wouldn't be shamed.
Okay, that's very nice. Maybe protecting his identity, since he didn't do the right thing. We don't have to know forever who this kinsman was that was kind of, you know, didn't do his thing. So that could be.
I think the other part of why he's in there is it helps also kind of completes the character of Boaz as being, I want to do the right thing, and I'm going to follow the right path. So it kind of flushes out his personality in another instance. He was righteous with Ruth in the evening. He didn't take advantage of this. He's going to do it right. And
he knows what's going on, right? He knows who the kinsman is. He knows he's sitting amongst the elders by the gate. So that's where the men's business takes place, right? The gate of the town. Towns used to be walled, ideally walled, because it kept you safer. And the gate of the town is where the elders would see it. There was court was in session, or if their business had to be decided, that was where business took place. The women are not at the gates, right? The women are at home, as Ruth and Naomi are. So the gates is where the men's business takes place, And so he goes to where the elders are. He goes to where he's one of the elders. So-and-so, come over here, and he came over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 elders of the town and said, be seated here, and they sat down. Right? So you need 10 elders, a minyan, right? Because there's some things that are going to need to be decided. There's a legal bearing here of what's going to happen, and Boaz has the, gravitas to call over 10 elders and tell them to be seated, and they sit down. He said to the Redeemer, Naomi, now returned from the country of Moab, must sell the piece of land which belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. What? Huh? Okay, what's he talking about here? First of all, what do we find out that Naomi has? She has land. We thought she was so empty, right? She owns land from her husband's family. Land is worth, like Scarlett O'Hara, land is worth everything, right?
But I thought women couldn't inherit.
She has no other heirs. Women cannot inherit if there are no, right. So women can't inherit if there are any other male siblings. But if there are no male siblings and you're like the only daughter, you can inherit. So Naomi has no husband and no sons, she inherits. But we thought she had nothing, right? We thought she was penniless, she had nothing, she came back empty, she needed Boaz, who's a landowner. Little did we know, whoops, she's got some land.
Is she required to sell it, though?
She is not required
So
to
she
sell
can't.
it. She is not required to sell it. But this is an interesting thing. We thought that Boaz was coming to talk about Ruth. Why, so this is very interesting. How does Boaz approach this kinsman? Now, if you remember from the Torah, not only when you're a kinsman, when you're a redeeming kinsman, you have the obligation to redeem and to marry the woman that dies childless in the family. But there's also a rule in the Torah about redeeming land. So, land is never sold forever, according to the Torah. So remember, land is divided up by tribes, and every tribe gets its allotment of land, and then within the tribe, people own different parcels of that land. But you never want the land going out of the tribe, because then it won't be so you can't have a person come in, and a very wealthy person, and buy up all of the land of Judah, and then say, you know what, I'm now going to rename it, it's also now it's going to be, we're going to just get the whole area of Benjamin and Judah's out. So in the Jubilee year, land reverts back to its original owner. So basically what you're doing is not selling your land, you're leasing it. And depending how close you are to the Jubilee year, which is every 50th year, you could be leasing it for 1 year, you could be leasing it for 49 years. So obviously the value of land changes depending on how close you are to that. Because obviously, though I don't know, maybe you lease it for less if it's a long-term lease because you don't know what's going to happen, whereas if you're doing it for a year or two, I don't know what the economics are, but basically that's what happens. And there's a beautiful story in the prophet in Jeremiah when the Babylonians are coming, and Jeremiah is thrown in jail by the Israelite king, and his people are fleeing, right? The Babylonian army is, on the doorstep, and his cousin comes to him and says, I have a field, do you want to buy it? So you would understand that first of all he's in jail, and second of all, as an invading army is about to come in, how much is land actually worth? It's not worth anything, right? It's going to be scorched, burned, and Jeremiah buys it, and he says to him, houses will once again be built on this land, and vineyards will be. It's a field in Anatot, so if you go to Israel, you go to Anatot. But land will be, there will be vineyards will grow here again, houses will be built again. And that quote from Jeremiah, you find it like all these beautiful quotes from the prophets that promise that Israel will be redeemed, will flourish again. You find these quotes all over buildings in Israel, state buildings in Israel, and different places. This promise that you'll be brought back in this land, which you think is worthless right now, is actually, has this deep spiritual worth and will be worth something else again. So you are responsible as the kinsman to redeem, if you can afford to buy it, to redeem this land so that it stays within the family and the tribal unit. So surprise, surprise, Naomi has land, and he asks him, do you want to buy it? Because it belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. I thought I should disclose the matter to you and say, acquire it in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. My people. Again, maybe some foreshadowing that this guy is kind of outside the boundaries because he's not doing the right thing. If you are willing to redeem it, redeem. But if you will not redeem, tell me that I may know, so there is no one to redeem but you, and I come after you. Right? So you want this nice, choice piece of land? If you do, otherwise I'll buy it. And he says, I'm willing to redeem it. So again, we're like, what is, actually going on here? This is, I thought this was a story about Ruth, and all of a sudden they're making a land transaction, and they're doing it in this legal way in front of all these elders. Boaz continued, when you acquire the property from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabite, you must also acquire the wife of the deceased, which means what would happen to this piece of land that he acquired if Naomi and he should have a son, or even a daughter. It goes to that child. So you can redeem the land. It's fantastic. That's great. And by the way, you should know that it comes with a woman. And, this will just be great, and you'll now, get to care for the land, but you won't really actually own it. And, you're the heir that you have with Ruth will be the one that gets the land, though truthfully, he is still the, biological father of this child. You'd think he'd be happy that this child would have a piece of land. So as to perpetuate the name of the deceased amongst his estate. Right? So that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to perpetuate the name of the deceased. And if this is what you need to do. And so in a way, it's like it's your child. It's not really your child. It's not your name. It's not your land. So he kind of sets him up here, right? Like we see the Redeemer wants the land. Like this is fantastic. I'll get a land. This is great. Oh, the land comes with all this other responsibility with it. So it kind of shows him off, to be a little, greedy may be too harsh of a word, but always one thing about making a business transaction where he buys land, it's a very different thing about a transaction that's going to have all this responsibility with it.
If Ruth is still a Moabite, as she's waiting, is she entitled to this letter of marriage?
Well, that's, the story assumes that she is, right? That's interesting. The story assumes that she is, even though he refers to her as a Moabite. But the fact that she's a Moabite might not be a wonderful selling point to, for marriage. Like the fact that he's reminding him at this moment, it's like you get Ruth the Moabite, who, by the way, everybody else has seemed to have heard about. Right? Everybody in the town knows about her. So Ploni Almoni, where have you been to step up to say, oh, I'm the next redeeming kinsman? So he doesn't in any way go, oh, you know this. Yes, I'm meaning to call you about that. Like, where has he been? So either he's the one of everybody that doesn't know, right? Everybody knows that he doesn't know, or he knows that he doesn't really intend to do anything about it.
Strikes me as just making sure that Boaz truly wants the outcome to be his way.
Yes, I think so. I think he's setting it up, right? He's setting it up because he might not be interested in Ruth without the land. He's not going to be interested in Ruth with the land. But I think this shows, I agree with you, I think this shows that Boaz is trying to craft the ending that Ruth ends up with him and not with this person. And I don't think that the story is making the Redeemer look particularly, he might be a fine person, but he doesn't deserve to be the ancestor of King David, right? He does that, he's not a bad guy. Like Orpah, right? People, nobody's suggesting that she's evil, nobody's suggesting that he's evil. Lots of people think about, their economic well-being and what might be best for them and best for their other responsibilities, and he's not able to take on this responsibility at this time, okay, there's another Redeemer, let him do it. But you don't get to be, the grandfather of King David if you act in that way. The Redeemer replied, and again, how many times he's mentioned without his name, right? So the Redeemer replied, then I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own estate. Right? I've got other obligations. I can't take on the obligation of caring for this land that's not going to actually stay, in my family. You take over my right of redemption, for I am unable to exercise it. So, and right, he's got the right to do that, and luckily in front of 10 elders.
In a way, the purpose of this, to me, is like to show what an honorable person Boaz is.
Right.
The whole story shows, because he felt he had to ask him.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
was the right thing to do. But now that he's refusing it, he's going to
That's
take
right.
over.
That's
Can
right.
I just ask you, this may be a very silly question, but in modern times, in our grandparents' times, or when they were still in Poland, Russia, whatever, if a wife or husband in the family would die, it was tradition for the brother or sister to step up. And is that traced?
I know a lot of stories, like from a legal point of view, the husband was responsible for marrying the unmarried.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of stories, and I don't think this was part of Jewish law, it might have just been custom, where a woman dies and then her widow marries the
Yeah.
sister.
The sister.
So I do, and even if there was, so I have heard that. I think that was not uncommon. But again, it might have been this idea that, you have to take care of a woman that is,
But it doesn't relate.
but it doesn't relate to levirate marriage. I can't think of one example that I know of actually a man marrying his brother's sister. Like I don't know that was commonly done. So as we'll see, there's a ritual, right, when you don't do it anymore. When you don't do it, when you refuse to do it. Now, it was an interesting question in the modern state of Israel, this whole issue of levirate marriage, because, while Israel is a modern secular state, ritual is governed by the Orthodox. And in Orthodoxy, you're still required to go through this ritual if you don't do it. And I can't imagine too many secular Jews that would agree to do it. And I think it's probably, I don't know if it's a big issue today, but it was certainly something that was talked about, in the early years, because this is how, Jewish law, but I actually, so I don't know, but I know that there were there was talk about it, because it was, it was certainly not a ritual that many modern people would want to
There was an
put
Arabian
themselves
movie
through.
not so long ago with that subject.
Yes.
Okay,
And they
okay.
show it with the shoe and he spit on it.
Right. You'll see, takes off the sandal and he spits on it, and it's like, most people will be like, I think not, I think not. And frankly, thank you very much, but I also don't want to marry my sister-in-law.
Backing up, where did so-and-so come from, and why is he first to be redeemed?
We don't know anything about it. That's the whole thing. Where did he come from? We got a whole story waiting for Boaz. From the time she starts gleaning, we're waiting for Boaz. The narrator tells us he's a kinsman. And then all of a sudden, but it makes the story so much more fun, right? It makes it so much more like, the anticipation. Oh, now there's a problem. It's got to be, solved. And how's it going to work out before we can get the couple back on track so everybody can live happily ever after? So, now, this was formerly done in Israel in cases of redemption or exchange. To validate any transaction, one man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. Such was the practice in Israel. So one of the things about acquiring things, it's not obviously like today where you have a written contract, and even who knows if there'll even be written contracts in the future, but everything will just be done, electronically. Everything's so interestingly in flux. But in ancient times, the way you showed acquisition was by doing something physical. So if you were buying an animal, you had to grab onto it and lead it towards you. If you were buying a piece of land, you had to walk around the land. When you do the ketubah signing, it was traditional for the man to pull the ketubah towards him. So even if a signed contract wasn't enough, he had to pull it towards him to show that he was taking acquisition of all the responsibilities within the ketubah. So we find out now that there's also a ritual of exchange where a man takes off a shoe and there's some sort of exchange, because how do you show that, I guess you could go take Ruth, but how do you show that this deal has been made? So, when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Acquire for yourself," he drew off his sandal, and Boaz said to the elders and to the rest of the people, "You are witnesses today that I am acquiring from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Machlon. I am also acquiring Ruth." Would have been, would have been nice, right? Would have been nice. Again, it's one of these things that, it's not a love story. The word for, we like to talk about kiddushin and holiness, and the word for marriage is, holy matrimony, but it was considered an acquisition. It was an acquisition, and how do you know it was an acquisition? Because you had to give the woman something of value under the chuppah. I mean, there were other things too. You had a ketubah, which promised the things that you were going to, how you were going to take care of her. But it was, you were acquiring her, right? You were acquiring her, and there's lots of, today there's a lot of talk about even, the marriage ceremonies. We know what today is still a marriage ceremony that assumes that.
No, this is going on. Ruth is in the room.
Ruth is
in the tent.
She's with Naomi. This is all taking place out of the gates where men do business, and the business is being done in the field and anything else that they own, and Ruth are all being acquired by Boaz. So as to perpetuate the name of the deceased upon his estate, that the name of the deceased may not disappear from among his kinsmen and from the gate of his hometown, you are witnesses today. Right, so I'm going to take care of, he praises Ruth for being so loyal to the dead, and he is also the kind of person that's loyal to the dead. So even though this may not be of real financial benefit to him, he's doing the right thing, he's doing what needs to be done, according to the law of Israel, as opposed to this other redeemer who cannot or will not. All the people at the gate and the elders answered, "We are. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah." Right, so this is beautiful, right? Who is she now? Who should she be like? The matriarch, right? She's like, she should be like the matriarchs, right? Like part of the sorority. Right, she's part of the sorority, right? She's part of the sorority. She is part of, I don't know, I guess the Israelite people. She should be, a matriarch in her own right, like the very first matriarchs, both of whom built up the house of Israel. So she should also, of course, better she should be like Leah than Ruth. Leah than Rachel, who dies, in childbirth after only having, 2 children. But their greatness, part of their greatness, right, is perpetuating the tribes of Israel, the Jewish people, the founding, fathers of the tribes. So she should be like that, and prosper in Ephrata, and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem. So not just the name of the deceased, but your name as well. And may your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now wait a minute. Like, what would you be expecting him to say? What's the parallel? If she should be like Rachel and Leah, Boaz should be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do we, we've got Rachel and Leah without Sarah and Rebecca. We're used to hearing Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. But at least we're used to hearing Rachel and Leah. Have you ever heard anybody bless, may you be like Peretz? Like, this is it, right? This is it, never, nowhere. And again, like, may you be like Peretz was born of this relationship where Tamar had to trick Judah into doing the right thing. It's a very odd blessing, but the story wants to tell us, in case you didn't remember, in case you didn't know, who Tamar was and how this plays into the lineage. And Peretz, of course, is his ancestor, and so it's in that line, but it's a very, unusual blessing.
I think it's probably because the name Paris had already, it's written after the fact, so that Paris probably was already accepted as being the ancestor to David. They had to kind of work.
Oh, so they had to work backwards to make sure they got them in there to make sure that it goes, But it's interesting that they feel, the narrator or the elders feel the need to talk about this relationship with Judah and Tamar. Because actually this is the exact opposite of Judah and Tamar. Right? Judah has to be tricked into doing the right thing. Boaz was not tricked into doing the right thing. Boaz steps up to do the right thing as soon as he gets the opportunity. But the story wants us to understand who all the background players are in here. So, okay, and again they call her a Na'ara, a young woman. So again, we don't know how old she is, but, not that old. So, Boaz married Ruth, and she became his wife. And he cohabitated with her after they were married. Right, after they were married in the proper order, for her to get pregnant. The Lord let her conceive. Again, we have lots of stories, right? The Bible is filled with stories of women that can't conceive, and then there's a miracle for conception. We know that she was, married for 10 years, didn't have children, and now that the time is right, because again, if she had children, the story wouldn't have ended up the way that we needed it to end up. So we're told in the end that she's able to have this child. And the women said to Naomi, right? The women said to Naomi, so we have all the action, all the business transactions with the men, and now we're back into the house of the women, where the women are gathering, and they're talking to Naomi, and they say, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not withheld a redeemer from you today. May his name be perpetuated in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain your old age, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons." So beautiful, right? I came back empty, right? And they say to her, right? She says, "I came back empty," with Ruth standing next to her. And now you have a redeemer, you have this child, he'll grow up, he's going to care for you. And what do all these women recognize? Ruth is better than 7 sons, I mean, we know, unfortunately, through most of history and in many non-Western countries today, having a son, there's nothing, having a son is the be-all and end-all of, I mean, look at, even China today, right? Having a son is the best thing that could happen to you. So to be told that a daughter-in-law, not even a daughter, right, but a daughter-in-law is better than 7 sons. Now, of course, emotionally, it doesn't erase all of her grieving for her children who she loved and that she was the mother of, but the recognition of the women from the town to be able to say to her, Naomi, you came back empty. We watched this whole story unfold, and this is what we think about Ruth. And what do they not call her in that verse? Right, they don't call her a Moabite. Right, the rest of the story, right, they always are referring to her as a Moabite, but here she's one of us. She's not a Moabite anymore. She's a daughter-in-law, and
They don't even mention Ruth anymore.
Ruth is gone.
Not Ruth.
Ruth, she did her job, right? Ruth is gone, right? They say, we don't hear Ruth speak again, right? After, her big encounter with Boaz, Ruth is silent in the story. All the action goes to Boaz and now to Naomi. So Ruth did what she needed to do, but she does get recognition from all of the women. And we're told that Boaz, that everybody, right? Everybody in the town knows how wonderful she is. Naomi took the child and held it to her bosom, and she became its foster mother. So remember, the duty of the Redeemer is to provide the deceased husband with a child. But who do they actually provide with the child? Naomi, right? Naomi gets the child. Now, as I said, I love my mother-in-law, but the image of her taking the child to become, this is mine, and she is the foster mother. I hope that Ruth was okay with that. I hope that there wasn't a problem. Maybe she went on to have other children and it was fine. But this child belongs to Naomi. I mean, a foster mother, that's pretty, you know. And the women neighbors gave him a name. So Ruth doesn't even name her child. And we know naming and the power of naming, so she doesn't even name him. Women gave him a name saying, a son is born to Naomi. That's who this child now belongs to, and does not really have anything to do with anything, but my husband and I have been slowly watching the PBS documentary on the Roosevelts. And if you watched it, like his mother, you know, her children belong, you know, Franklin and Eleanor's children kind of belong to her, which frankly, Eleanor probably seemed to be relatively fine about because she had, you know, other things that she wanted to do. So
She took on other things.
or she-
because of her.
or did she could take out other things because the mother, well, my husband and I started debating this, like, you know, he's like, why, you know, she wasn't very, Eleanor was a very good mother, why did she have children? And I said, what choice did she have in that day and age? Would it have ever occurred to her, like, I won't have children or I'll stay single and I'll pursue a career? Like, you can maybe blame, you know, people for being bad parents, but she, you know, she obviously took on a role that society told her she had to take. So, okay, never mind, I did such a, but I'm defending her. So.
What is the name Obed?
Oved is like a worker. Like a worker. Oved, like lavod is to work. So a son is born to Naomi, right? This is recognized that this is Naomi's redeemer, right? Not just Ruth's redeemer, and maybe not even Ruth's redeemer, but Naomi's redeemer. They named him Oved. He was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. So Boaz then is the great-grandfather, right? The great-grandfather of King David.
It also brings the lineage back to the Moabites.
That's right. That's right. That's right. This is the line of Peretz. Peretz begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nachshon. Nachshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Right? Boaz begot Oved. Oved begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. Right, so you get the whole, this is not just, as I said, a simple, lovely story. This is the story of the monarchy, right? The monarchy of the Jewish people and the line that's supposed to then produce the Messiah.
And they're also making sure that people will not consider the child to be in any way a Moabite. Because it's a foster child of Naomi.
Oh, very nice, right. So Ruth's Moabite lineage is sort of knocked out because this is the child actually of an Israelite woman, Naomi.
I just counted how many times the word redeemer or redemption appears. It's close, I think 19 times.
In chapter 4 or the
No,
whole
no,
book? 19 times.
And if David is the Messiah comes from David. The Messiah is ultimate redemption. So therefore the use of the word redeem just jumped out at me for the first time. I didn't know this before, but it's interesting, 19 times.
It's fantastic, right? 19 times to say redeemer, it wants to tell
Over and
us
over again.
more than
It's
just a
really redundant in some
Right,
places.
right. So, right, because the ultimate geulah, right? The ultimate redemption. First of all, the ultimate geulah, our redemption, will come from God, but at the hand of the Messiah, who is the Goel. So, yes, so this is a lot of hopeful foreshadowing about the future ultimate, you know, not just the redemption in this moment in history, then the story of King David, but maybe, you know, even points to the ultimate messianic redemption. It's a nice way to end it. How was that for timing, too? Anyway, this has been a pleasure.
very
A lot of
popular
people name
name.
their children Boaz.
Yeah.
Right, Ruth and Naomi become very popular
Anybody
names, and
named Boaz?
Boaz,
You do?
not really, do you know Boaz?
Oh, no, you know what?
But it's not that common of a name. It is, he's a good character, he's a good character. So Rabbi Stoller already asked me if I would come back next year, and I said, yeah, I'd be glad.